Welcome to Pastured Poultry Talk, episode number 49. This is your host, Mike Badger. Before I get to the interview with farmer and now author Caroline Owens, I thought I'd take a moment and say thank you. Thank you for being a loyal listener, and if this is your first show, welcome. I hope that you stick around. I really needed some time management help these last 6 months. Starting in September and running through January, about half of each month was spent on the road. I traveled on behalf of APA, on behalf of Global Poultry Initiative, and on behalf of myself. I've been blessed to meet many people around the common cause of poultry, people who see poultry differently, as food, as security, as a livelihood, and as a catalyst to change. Unfortunately, the schedule took a toll on me. And there's always a casualty when stress hits. One of my casualties has been producing this podcast. I actually recorded Pat McNiff's show last fall. In episode 50, I talked to Grady Phelan, and I also recorded that show months ago. I wanted Grady to be the 50th episode, so I had to find the time to get a few additional shows recorded, which turns out to be Simon Huntley and now Caroline Owens. Other than being a bit of inside the podcast talk, this really strikes to the heart of the conversation in today's episode on time management. Caroline gives us a theme to be successful. It's simple, really. Planning and structure. Now, I do a lot of planning, believe it or not. It's the structure for accomplishing the plan that tends to be the bottleneck in my case. I'm working on that structure as we speak. You see, an interesting thing happened while I was traveling all over the country this past winter. People acknowledged this podcast. I often heard people say things like, I started listening and I've learned so much. I'm almost finished with all the episodes. Will there be more? And first of all, that's incredible to me because at the time, we had 47 episodes published. That is, 40 hours, 35 hours of content easily. So the answer is yes, there will be more. The more has to fit into my existing schedule and be done in a way that works. And other exciting thing that's happening here as we head into the spring of 2017 is that I picked up a new opportunity. While at the PASA conference in State College in February, I stopped by the Moyer Chicks booth to catch up and say hi. They asked if Badger's Millside Farm would like to distribute some of their specialty pullets. They specifically asked us to be a distributor for ready-to-lay, certified organic pullets. Of course, we agreed because we were kind of searching for some ways to fill in some of our farm work and that enterprise. So this was a great opportunity. But we also asked to distribute some of their conventionally raised, ready-to-lay pullets with untrimmed beaks. And Pat McNiff talked about these very birds in his episode number 48, about how he uses them for cash flow on his layer enterprises. So of course they agreed to give us some of those birds. So you can call this an ad if you will, but if you're within striking distance of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, that's the north central part of the state, and find yourself in need of ready-to-lay birds. These are birds that will lay their first eggs within a week or two of arriving to your farm. Then I ask simply, check out millsidefarm.com. We can be very competitive, especially if you need volume. I got thousands of birds at the ready, and I'll provide a link in the show notes. The untrimmed beaks are here in early April. The certified organic ready-to-lay pullets will be in mid-June 2017. One last thing before we jump to Caroline. I'd like to encourage you to join the Pastured Poultry Talk Facebook group. It's a young group. It's got a few members already. I want to use that forum to discuss and hear your thoughts on each show. So without further delay, let's go ahead and talk to Caroline and her new book on time management. Okay, so today I had the pleasure of being joined by Caroline Owens, who farms in Sunbury, Pennsylvania with her husband David and 3 kids. I've actually known Caroline for, I forget how many years now, but met them through PASA, through their pigs, and of course through chicken. Everything kind of comes back to chickens for me. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
We're going to be discussing time management tips for farmers. Sustainable Farmers Share Tips for Taming the To-Do List, which is the book that you put together and released here just at the end of 2016. So we're going to talk through that. But before we do, Caroline, why don't you just take a moment, introduce yourself, and just give us a little bit of what you have going on there at Owens Farm.
Okay. Well, David and I farm here down in Sunbury, PA. And our main enterprise is producing grass-fed meat. I would say our centerpiece enterprise are the sheep. At this point, we have 130 ewes, and we produce lamb for the direct freezer trade, and we sell a lot of weanling lambs to other producers. We do have the pigs. We raise Tamworth pigs for direct sale to customers, and the chickens, pastured chickens, for direct sale to customers. And so that's our core business. On top of that, we have some educational programs. I'm an ex-ag teacher, so I'm attracted to those sorts of things. We have sheep camp for kids in the summer, 3 weeks in the summer. We have a program that we call Adopt a Sheep, which the families will be assigned a sheep for a 12-month period, and they follow that sheep throughout the year. And that's great for families. The sheep becomes the kind of the lens through which the family views all of the activities on a farm, all of the seasonal activities. We have lambing time slumber parties, which is a way that people can come in on what we think is the most exciting time of the year.
Right.
And we have overnight lodging for vacation. So that's just kind of a wrap-up of us.
Yeah, and I'm always amazed at the number of things that you have going on. Seems like there's, you got the production side of it, you got the educational side of it, and you marry them from the outside. It looks like you marry them quite well together.
We do. Housekeeping is not on that list, you'll notice, but we're not going to talk about that, are we?
Not unless you bring it up. So one of the things I highlighted here as I was reading, a quote that kind of stuck out to me and resonated a little bit is, what do you do when working your hardest is not good enough? And what do you do when your dream threatens to become a nightmare? And I want to use kind of that quote to just kind of ask you if you could expand on what that means and what was the motivation for looking at time management for farmers?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I know for us, we found ourselves, when we moved onto this farm, we found ourselves in a situation which I now understand many people have, being thrown onto an exciting new property, dream come true. Reality is that old house, lot to do, winter coming. And we did find ourselves in a very stressed period, and we had to evolve strategies to get out of that. And it worked, and it was all a happy ending. But here's the thing. We give seminars to other farmers, a lot of them PASA members, sustainable farmers. We offered seminars in pork production and sheep production. This put us face to face with many, many farmers in many different phases of farming, from the beginning to the experience. And we noticed that we weren't the only ones who were insanely busy. When we talked to farmers on a personal level, that was like the pink elephant in the living room. Everyone wanted to talk about production methods and share knowledge and brag about how good their markets were. But underlying it was an awful lot of stress and tension. And that's what, in PASA, one of the underlying concepts for that organization is that we share our knowledge, and a rising tide raises all boats. And nobody was talking about this. And that's when we got the concept of, if obviously those who are successful are out on their own farms and they've devised strategies that work, why can't we share those as you share recipes for getting rid of potato bugs? And that's what led to an interview-based book. I'm going around and talking to other farmers about their strategies for handling time management.
And who did you? Yeah, I like those. Sometimes I like those pink elephants in the room. It's interesting when you hang around people. You pick up on those topics, and this I think is a big one. I mean, I feel the effects of it all the time. It seems like not having enough time to get the things you need done, and not having enough time to do that. So how did you determine then who you were going to interview for the book, and kind of what made them, I guess the question is, what made them worthy of interviewing for their time management advice? Was it something you saw in them, or just personal relationships?
It was all of the above. To start out with, I wanted people who had been farming for 5 years or more, because I didn't want advice from what I'm going to call the honeymoon period, when you think you can do it all. The real creativity comes when reality hits, and that takes a few years. After that, I loosely wanted to do a broad selection of farms because each type of farm, whether dairy, fruit, vegetable, livestock, they all have different concerns. And I wanted the readers to be able to resonate with farms that were like them. And beyond that, yes, it was networking and knowing people. And quite a few people, when I asked if they would want to participate, they said, oh, I can't, I'm hopeless, I'm too busy. I'll read it. I need that book, but I can't participate, which I'm sure they could have, but they didn't feel confident. So that was a lot of it. Those that not only had ideas to share, but wanted to share them.
Yeah, understand that. I know. And I was, setting up this interview. I know when I talked to you at the conference, Pasta conference, you're like, well, we have 2 weeks before we lamb. And then pretty much after that, nothing happens. So other than lambs happen. So I took that as I had a narrow window of opportunity to get this interview in, and we made it work. But so then what would you say was your goal with writing this book? It is an interview-based book. I liken it to a profile. So you go through and you talk with farms, and I like the fact that you pegged people with experience. That I like that. So when you set out to write this, what was your initial idea and goal?
I would say it was two-pronged. The first one was that it would be a resource, an idea guide, that instead of everybody having to reinvent the wheel and come up with the same idea and on different farms, they could jump the learning curve a little bit and read through this and find out people that had ideas that would work for them so they wouldn't have to think of them originally. Well, one idea would lead to another, how the creative process goes. Mm-hmm. So from a strictly practical, action-oriented view, that's what it was, the resource book. The second, though, and most, I would say, equally important goal was for farmers to understand that they were not alone in having this problem, that time stress didn't make them unique, that they weren't somehow inferior to other farmers, because it's human nature to put on a good face and pretend that everything's okay. Right. So it's just all too easy for especially the beginning farmers to look at experienced farmers and think, I'm not good enough. They've got it together. They don't get too busy. They get everything done. And we don't want anybody to feel like that because it's not true. And we need these beginners. We need their enthusiasm. We need them to take our place when we're gone. And
I can have a pretty good perspective in the pastured poultry world. And do you think, just as a side question to that, Caroline, do you think that sometimes that stems from new farmers looking around them and having this idea of diversity right from the very beginning, and they say, well, Caroline has lambs and pigs and poultry, and they do turkeys, and they do all these other things, and they see that too, and try to do that from day one. Is that kind of? That's kind of what I see when I look at new people, and you color me guilty, but I was wondering if that was kind of a similar experience for you.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. And the problem is people are taking a snapshot. They're not seeing the years that came before when the experienced people built up their businesses. And the really important thing is they can't see that maybe 3 years later, the balance will have shifted. They'll be, raising more pigs and fewer turkeys, or getting rid of this pet project, which is all part of farming. You change and adapt. Yeah. But absolutely, people see a snapshot and they want to do it all immediately.
Yeah, and I know that because I've been over to your place, I know you have a lot of those projects running around your place. But a lot of good fun. It keeps us energized to have new things to think about. But I think that's good. That snapshot of is just what we're doing today. It doesn't tell us how we got there, and that's an important perspective, I think, for us to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering then, as you as you went through the book and as you talked with people, there's some recurring themes, and some of the two big ones that I pick up on are the emphasis on how you approach labor and technology. And I'm wondering if you can just talk to me a little bit about how those two things affect time management. That
yeah. Seen. Okay. That those two topics in particular were one of the surprises to me as the book unfolded. Starting with the technology, I just happened to write this at a very interesting time in history. We started the interviews in 2012 and finished up last year. So that's exactly when cell phones were taking over.
Okay.
And so people were trying them out, people were adapting, some people were resisting them. But in the end, if I look at all the interviews and how people use their technology, it is a complete wash. There were people who are still based with paper and pencil lists and notebooks, and it works fine for them. There are people who are smartphoning everything, and it works fine. And there are those that have gone back and forth, which I found even more interesting. They try the technology, but for different reasons, different technological reasons, they find that, that notebook always did work, and I'm going to keep it up. And that list, I like the feeling of scratching and rewriting, and it works because there's no silver bullet. It's such a personal thing. And so that's where it came down on the technology.
And for the technology, do you think that's a personality kind of thing, or is there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's almost nothing more personal than how people manage their times and priorities. And just because they can do everything online, and not always the best. And the labor was also something that was completely all over the map. Some of my farms were family farms with no outside labor. Others were very large operation with just like a well-oiled machinery, especially the vegetable people bringing in crews seasonally. And they had the same, at the root of it, they had the same time management concerns. They were applying the same principles just on a larger and more different scale. So again, hiring help was not always just the simple thing that would take away all time management problems because suddenly there would be excess man hours. That was a complete figment of the imagination.
Yeah. And so you mentioned there an idea, principles of time management. As you work through the book, what are some of those, your takeaway principles? What are those kind of topics?
Okay. And this will actually cycle back to a question which we left on the table. You were asking about the problem of what do you do if everything is an A. It's planning. Planning and structure is the one thing that all of these farmers had in common. The farmers that I interviewed had come from corporate settings where they really did get everything done on the to-do list. And that was, in many cases, a mark of success. And so it was just a situation for them to be in a place where you couldn't get to the bottom of the to-do list, and it multiplied anyway.
Right. And on the farm, it changes every day. Sometimes radically as you respond to different emergencies. And I think back now, you in your own story, you're like, well, what do we do when everything has to happen? It's urgent. It's an A priority as you categorize them.
And so with a corporate background, very often there was when it went into farming, there was a knee-jerk reaction of throwing away all that idea about the planning and the prioritizing and the time management, thinking that was very, very corporate. Well, it turns out it was just as important in farming as anything else. So we saw in a lot of these successful farmers is planning daily, weekly, annually, leaving nothing to chance. And in many cases, the week itself was structured. And the people that raise vegetables and have CSAs are easily led into that because they have to harvest and wash and pick up on certain days.
Right.
But the livestock people found the same thing. For example, if there was a fixed chore pattern, and Joel Saladin talked a lot about this because he has interns, so he had to make everything very easy to communicate. The more routinized the chores could be, the more time there would be discretionary time in the day. And again, that all boiled down to planning, not just getting up and saying, yeah, what do I feel like doing today?
Right. Right.
So those were the two things that really resonated through the book, the forward planning and the structured routine, which again might just grate at the nerves of somebody at first blush because you're your own boss, you own everything, you can do anything you want, you really want the confines of the schedule. Well, actually you do, because the rest of the day is going to be a lot better if there is some structure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, that's one of the areas I generally like to play a little loose sometimes is that actual plan. I might have a plan, but I always am sometimes too quick to jump off of it. And then, that spirals downhill. So, I mean, I enjoy and throughout the book, realizing that my problems are your problems, so to speak, or your problems are my problems. And there's a certain benefit in knowing that, we're not alone, and people solve this problem, and it is possible for just about any personality type you can imagine. And, for me, that was a refreshing look. What one interview stood out? I'm looking through the list of the people that are in here. You mentioned Joel. I know the Tewksbury's are here. We have Over the Moon. So a lot of people that I'm familiar with, but I'm wondering who resonated with you? Like what was the story that kind of made you take notice or just resonated, just stuck out?
Well, they were all, each one was unique. It's hard to pick one out, but there is one that made me chuckle, and he had a serious point. And that was Wayne over at Greengrass Farm.
Okay.
So we were talking about all of this, and he had an interesting angle because he had, from the corporate world, he worked with a business coach who continued to work with him when he went part-time farming and part-time business consulting on his own. So very, very deep into it. Mm-hmm. And I found that one of the themes that was really important was the ability to say no, which of course is not unique to farming, and we'll get back to some more of that. But his coach used to encourage him. Yeah, he did to-do lists, and to-do lists was fine, but he said he'd also make me do a not-to-do list. and that helped me throw some things off the plate. And I thought that was pretty good. Because as I went along and interviewed more people, I had one person explaining how if you're talented and you know a subject area, it can be easy to be sucked into volunteer positions. And, sometimes you just have to say no to those.
Right.
Even though flattering, we went with Wayne's no list. And of course, we alluded to it before. Sometimes saying no means giving up the pet projects that you thought you wanted to do, but they're not paying the bills. They're way too much labor, or for whatever reason, if something just has to be taken out of your business model. Not easy to do, but you need to be willing to do it because there's only so much time. And even no public interface turned out to be something that everyone handles differently. Some people pull farm tours and customer visits into their day and into their business model, mm-hmm. and others find that just too disruptive, and so they just have to say no to drop-in visitors or even farm tours. I've even met people that their insurance does not cover farm tours, and they like it that way because it's an easy answer. The other thing that I think came up as a continuing theme, which might be a surprise, was work-life balance. not the surprising part. But the surprise was that I found that most people have had to actively intervene to separate a space for their home life. It could be as simple as at 6 o'clock we eat dinner and no more work unless it's an emergency. It could be as simple as let's take a walk, but we are not allowed to put anything on the to-do list. Just enjoy the scenery.
Right.
And it's something that you would think, again, you've got that vision of you're all out there and the kids are picking daffodils and making daisy chains, but you have to make that happen. Otherwise, it's work, 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 work.
Yeah, especially when you can't get everything you had to do done in the amount of daylight you have, and then when the sun goes down, there's still other stuff that could be done. So, yeah, definitely.
Yep, got it.
Now, if I could, I just wanted to kind of start to wrap up and just have a couple questions about the writing process, because one of the things we all know is we all have a book in us. So, what was I'm going to ask you two questions here, maybe three, but what was kind of the challenge for you in getting this book to print, like the whole creative process of getting the book out of Caroline and into print? What did you find one of the most challenging parts of that was?
Well, Mike, it was time management. This is kind of a double whammy. I'm a morning person, so I do everything in the morning. Any creative thought I've ever had has happened before sunrise. So that was my writing time.
Okay.
And about half the year, I don't really have that writing time because it's lambing and whatever. That's why it took 4 years to actually accumulate everything. So that was my cross to bear, was that my fingers would only fly in the morning when I didn't have other things to do. And then, of course, I had to interview farmers who were equally busy. So basically, nothing happened between March and October. In November, I would begin contacting people for the interviews, and we did them all in the winter. Okay. And then summer would come, and the project would stall out for another few months. But it's understandable. They always say, write what you know. Well,
and what did you learn about yourself through this process? Because the creative, the discipline to write a book, everybody might have the book in them, but not everybody has that discipline to get it out. And I find usually writing's a pretty enlightening process. So what did you discover about yourself?
Well, basically how this got done was in small chunks, and that's how I've always approached big projects. So that in itself wasn't something new. But what I found valuable was the content. Just like all of us, we struggle with time around here. And I, too, was picking up just great ideas from my interviewees, and not always something that I would go home and implement, but food for thought, something I would ruminate on, and maybe the idea I would implement later. And so it ended up being a resource for me and for Dave also. I also met a lot of nice, inspiring people. There's always people that do things better than you, and I'm always open to inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. And what advice would you give someone else who was thinking about writing their experiences or writing their book?
Well, the first thing I would start with was, unless you're under contract to an editor, don't be real concerned about how long it takes. I've talked to a lot of writers, and it took 4 years to put this together. And I didn't think it would take that long, but my benchmark was just a figment of my imagination. And talking to other writers as we went along, it turns out that, it takes what it takes. I was not the slowest, nor was I the fastest. And that, unless you're under contract, that would just add an incredible level of stress. But on the other hand, there was a plan that I had that I was following. I may have erased and rewritten the dates, but there was definitely a working plan. And I wasn't just blathering on to no apparent end. So I think we're back to that same place, planning and structure.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Keeps coming up.
Like those themes. Well, I'm kind of at the end of of my questions. As we wrap up, I would just say thank you for the time. Thank you for providing me with a copy of the book to read, even though it took me a little while to get through it and get our interview scheduled, but we did it. And I just give you the opportunity to kind of fill in any gaps or provide any information that we haven't covered yet, or, you know.
Well, I think we pretty much covered all the main points. I mean, the details and the great stories and the anecdotes and everything are in the book. That's why it's so hard to pull out the best of the best, because to me it was all good. People were just really great at contributing information. I think if you went back and asked any of the farmers what they were doing now, you'd find that it's changed, because farmers are always evolving. Our farm in particular too. So in a way, the whole book is a snapshot. And I guess from a practical standpoint, we should say that nowadays it's easy to get a hold of it. It's on Amazon. In the 4 years that I was writing that book, the entire publishing world changed, and Amazon became the king.
Yes.
And I'm happy for that. So it's easily attainable on Amazon.
And it is for the I guess the author types in us. How did you publish the book?
Oh, good question. I used Outskirts Publishing, which is a self-publishing publisher. Okay. And they did great. They made the whole process very, very easy.
Great. And I would just say that if you are interested in a copy of Caroline's book, and I do recommend it, that you can hop on over to pasturedpoultrytalk.com, and there will be a store link on there, and you'll be able to buy the book through Amazon, but they will give me a commission.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure talking with you. Take time to have some fun.
Hey, that'll wrap us for this episode. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check us out on the web. Our home is at pasturedpoultrytalk.com. Pasturedpoultrytalk.com. Never miss another episode again. Go there, find out how. Till next time, thank you.